I think we've got the waiting room open. Everyone can. Hello, everyone. My name is Alma Prelek. I'm one of the co-artistic directors of the International Online Theatre Festival hosted by the Theatre Times. Thank you so much for tuning in, both today and over the past few weeks, as we've been lucky enough to be able to screen and share with you productions from all over the world. We're particularly thrilled that as part of our 2020 program, over the past 2 weeks, we were able to screen 5 productions from the Schaubühne Theatre, whose history and role on the global stage, so to speak, is what will form the basis of the discussion today. So here with us, we have director Thomas Ostermeier and playwright Mark Ravenhill in a conversation that will be led by Peter Boenisch, Professor of European Theatre at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. So thank you very much again, everyone, for tuning in, and I'll pass it to you, Peter.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Alma. Thanks also to Maria as the Artistic Director of the IOTF. Thanks to Magda Romanska, also the host of the Theatre Times online critics platform. Thanks to the audience, it's really filling up on the screen here. Great that you're here this evening or whatever it is at your end. Thanks also to Thomas. Thanks to you, Mark. Now, our topic today, as Alma has said, is the Schaubühne, the theatre in Berlin, whose international success has begun in the 1970s, 1980s, of course, with the infamous Peter Stein as artistic director, when he introduced maybe the blueprint of the German Regietheater and directors theatre all over the world. In the last decades, under Thomas Ostermeier, who's been the artistic director of the Schaubühne since 2000. It opened in January 2000 with Thomas's production of Sarah Kane's Crave, which then makes the link why we have Mark also here with us tonight. In the last decades, it's really become an important reference point for contemporary theatre making internationally, not least because the Schaubühne is present all over the world. So it's no longer what those people in Germany and Berlin are doing, but everyone now has perhaps seen a production from Thomas, from the other directors working at the Schaubühne, as it tours extensively, although no longer at the moment, which is perhaps one of the things we also need to talk about. As Alma said, over the last weeks, you have seen 5 productions returning to Rams: The Marriage of Maria Braun and The Enemy of the People by Thomas, and also Katie Mitchell's production of Virginia Woolf's Orlando and Milo Rao's Lenin. And those of you out there who have perhaps discovered the Schaubühne's own online theatre festival on their homepage have also been able to see even more production from the current repertoire from the period under Thomas, but also some of the classics from Peter Stein and his associated directors. The legendary Winterreise by Klaus Michael Grüber was on a few days ago. Also productions by Andrea Breth, who was the artistic director before Thomas then came into the Schaubühne. Now, as I said, the English playwrights who were made famous by Alex Sears under that umbrella of in-your-face theatre were perhaps the one thing that made Thomas famous when he worked at the Baracke, the small theatre of the Deutsches Theater between 1996 and 1999, to then become artistic director here. And Mark's Shopping and Fucking was one of the key productions, the signature pieces at the Baracke, that then also moved to the Schaubühne and was in the repertoire until I think about 2010 or something. Mark continued his affiliation with the Schaubühne. There were some more productions, The Cut, for instance, in 2008. His play Over There, a play about German reunification, was shown during the Fine Festival as a guest production from the Royal Court under Ramin Gray. And only a few weeks ago, Mark was the mentor for a project that the Schaubühne had launched together with the Royal Court, bringing together 3 playwrights from Germany together with 3 playwrights from England. And there should have been a presentation of that during this year's Fine Festival, which then sadly was cancelled. And this is perhaps the one thing we should start talking about now, Thomas. For the first time in those almost 60 years of the Schaubühne, the theatre has now been closed since March, and we have heard this week from the Berlin authorities that this closure will go on for the rest of the season. So the earliest we may hopefully then see a production live on stage will be in August, September. So not only have your performances stopped, the rehearsals had to stop, your touring has stopped. You were meant to perform in Madrid, in Amsterdam, in Athens, and elsewhere over the next couple of weeks and months. So how is it going at the moment at the Schaubühne?
Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks for having me. How's it going? Well, the theater is closed, and as long as there is no interaction between stage and audience, there is no theater. All what we're doing online, the streaming, is a very poor thing if you compare the live event, the live experience, looking at theater. Nevertheless, we have a lot of work to do because we have to program it, we have to speak to the editing houses, we have to speak to the set designers, the actors, all the people involved in the theater production to give us the shows, the streaming opportunity without being paid. We do pay the editing house, so we do pay the writers, but the rest give us their royalties for free, or we don't pay any royalties. So it's an act of goodwill from all sides, and we are, for 1 week now, we've been streaming original texts by theater makers. Washti Mouawad did a text a few days ago, but we also had Stephen Greenblatt. We opened it with Annie Ernaux, who wrote a beautiful letter to the president. We're having just now at 6 o'clock, we started the streaming of a very interesting text of Geoffroy de la Gannerie, a French philosopher. And we are going to stream a new text by Didier Eribon on Tuesday. So quite exciting, but still a lot of things to do. And I don't envy publishing directors of a newspaper, because now I can see how often you have to call a writer before you get his text or her text.
Speaking of writers, now one might think that for playwrights such as you, Mark, working from the desk in the home office is almost a normal situation, but I assume the current situation also in some way affects you, with perhaps performances and other things cancelled. So how are you doing?
I was actually very, very fortunate in the run of the play I was doing finished on March the 8th. So I actually haven't had any performances cancelled, and nothing due to start again until September, October. So we'll see whether that happens. So I've just been very, very lucky in that respect, that actually this was a block of time when I wasn't due to have any performances. And being a writer is a good training for self-isolation. It's a sort of necessary part, which I haven't always enjoyed, but actually I'm rather enjoying this. It's very nice to stop for a while and to have no excuses really, and just to write. So I'm writing a lot. I'm missing live theatre. Again, it's an interesting thought experiment. Sometimes you think, what if it just all stopped? What if there was no theatre? Would I really be bothered? Maybe I just got addicted to doing this thing that I don't really. But actually, within a few weeks, I just thought, that space, that shared space of the audience and the actor, I do miss it, which in a way is quite pleasing to find that I actually have that appetite is there. It wasn't a sort of false appetite or a habit. It was actually something that I realize is, a vital part of my life, the live performance space. So as an audience member, I miss that, but as a writer, I feel rather in my element.
Mm. Now let's maybe come back to that live theatre space that Thomas has been shaping for the last, well, 25 years. It all began at the Baracke, a small experimental stage that the Deutsches Theater put up as a, well, experimental workshop stage on the side of their theater. And Thomas, just as he was about to graduate from the Ernst Busch Academy in Berlin, was appointed straight from the school the artistic director there. And at the time, in the legendary quote from the time, Thomas, you said, well, German theater only offered art crap, and that's what the German authors wrote. And that's where suddenly Mark Ravenhill, Sarah Kane, and a few other playwrights came in via the Royal Court and other theaters. And Mark, do you still remember your first encounter with Thomas, with that young director at the time from Germany?
Yeah, I do actually. Yes, the initial connections and collaboration was set up by the international department of the Royal Court, as far as I remember. And Elise Dodgson, I think, had already made that contact with the Baracke. But we had a week of play readings. I remember Sarah Kane and Phyllis Narge, and I think maybe Rebecca Pritchard were part of that.
Even Dawn was part of it, and Graham Whitebrow.
Oh, Graham Whitebrow, yeah. So it was actually my first time that I'd been to Berlin. So that was exciting in itself. And really just, it was maybe almost the last year or so before a big tipping point over into the sort of total accumulation of the East. So there was still lots and lots of cranes. The sky was full of cranes. So the new buildings, I mean, now the East has sort of become the West End. It's sort of very smart at that end of town. But then it was still lots of quite old buildings and lots of cranes. So it was really the last probably 6 months where you could walk through before the landscape was sort of reconstructed. And then, yeah, I met Thomas and Jens Hillier and people, I think that day, and maybe the cantina at the Deutsches Theater or something like that. And this week of readings at the Baracke. And there was a great sense of excitement on both sides. I think that there was a new sort of energy in the theatre. I also remember flying with Sarah Kane and Phyllis Narge, who competed to be the most scared person on the aeroplane. So if one said they were going to throw up, the other one said they were going to throw up all over the plane, and if one started shaking, the other. So there was this competition of who could be the most scared on the plane. So that stays with me very strongly as well.
Thomas, what did stay with you, and what did you find at the time in Mark's work, in the work of the other in-your-face playwrights, and maybe even how did it influence your work at the time as a young director just starting out at the Baracke in 96, 95, 96?
Well, what stayed with me is that on the one hand, I'm very grateful to people like, thankful to people like Mark and Sarah Kane, because I do believe that not only the fact that I put the plays on stage, but also the way they were portraying reality in their writing influenced a lot my directing. For example, when I put Hedda Gabler on stage, I was very much inspired by Sarah's personality, let's say. So it was for me kind of a Sarah Kane perspective on the character of Hedda Gabler. And also what was so striking for me, I still remember when I read Blasted for the first time, was one of these rare plays which I read in one go. You know, before when I took I don't know, any Schiller or even Shakespeare, I couldn't read these plays in one go because it was too too exhausting. It was too difficult. I couldn't find my way into. But Blasted was yeah, what you sometimes call a page turner. It was so exciting to read it, and all of a sudden I found out that what I was always longing for, to have an immediate communication with reality, with plays I want to put on stage. All of a sudden I had the place for this. All of a sudden there were texts which provided me with this possibility, which wasn't there before, because in Germany at the time, and it's still a little bit like this, if you want to make your career as a director, you make it by putting classical plays on stage. There's rarely a generation of German directors who are influenced, inspired, and go along with their career with a playwright, with associated playwrights, with playwrights which are important for them. This is something which is completely not fashionable anymore, and not existing anymore, actually. We do have some playwrights still in Germany writing, but most of them put their plays on stage themselves, which is true for René Polish, which is true for Falk Richter, which is true for Marius von Meidenburg now. So there seems to be a problem in this relationship between writers and directors in German theater. But the time when we started out at the Baracke, it was completely different, because it was something new to have plays which were directly talking about what's going on outside. So what was most striking for me was, of course, Shopping and Fucking, which is, as you named it, was the signature piece of my early career and of the Baracke. And it described this post-Thatcher young generation with this feeling of no future, and trying to find a way to give any sense to their life, sharing a flat and doing shitty jobs and being exploited, doing stupid jobs like selling drugs. And it was for me a statement on the state of capitalism, not only in the UK at this time, but also, and even more, for us in Berlin, it was a statement to what we were undergoing, or where we were heading. So the speech of Brian at the end of the play is still relevant today, as a kind of dystopian monologue on what we are all experiencing in this hardcore neoliberal times. So that's what made these plays so relevant for me. They had a political attitude. They were talking about the reality outside, the social reality, the society. And what is even more important, they were not portraying, in the case of Mark's Shopping and Fucking, but also in the case of Sarah's plays of Blast, they were not portraying middle class rich kids. They were portraying working class characters. And that is also something which for me was very important at the time, and which wasn't true for a lot of German playwrights, if there were any. There weren't any anyway at this time.
Now, Thomas, you just described how in German theater it was a rare thing for directors to directly engage with playwrights in the theater. Mark, I suppose the English theater direction or tradition works a bit the other way around. So playwrights are not perhaps used to really deal with directors who then actually do something with their plays and who might intervene and change something. There have been lots of statements by people like yourself, also by Simon Stevens from his cooperation with Sebastian Nübling and similar directors about this meeting in the theater. How was it for you encountering Thomas as a director of your work on the stage at the time?
I think what I realized was that I mean, Thomas very definitely directed the play. You know, I didn't feel that you know, as you sometimes can with bad Regie Theater, that the play was really just an excuse for whatever type of Regie Theater that director wanted to play. That the text more or less was irrelevant. I felt that Thomas had very much engaged with the play, and that his production was very much about my play. I think the main difference, and the thing that was at first a shock and unsettling, was I think whereas the first English production had created a sort of psychological thread through the piece and in a way made everything join up, there was a sort of smoothing over of the bumps in the text in the English production that made it somehow easier to watch and somehow look more accomplished and more finished as a play. And Thomas was more directing the event by event and scene by scene in a way that was, you know, probably owed more to like Meyerhold as much as it did to Stanislavski. So in a way, it sort of exposed the bumps and turns of the play. Sometimes in a way we thought, oh no, I wish you wouldn't expose that rather weak bit of writing there. But it was definitely all the play that I wrote. But if there was a bit of writing that was a bit crap, they would present it as a bit of writing that was a bit crap, and engage with the stuff that was serious. And so it was very much like an X-ray being put on the play. So it was a very honest realization of the play, up to the point of honesty of exposing its faults as well. Something which many Berliners do to you in conversation. It had that sort of ruthless honesty. And at first I thought, oh, can't I have the production which slightly hides some of the flaws and the contradictions of the play? I think this has a lot to do with contradiction. That the English method, which was very thorough, the way that the play was originally produced, but it tended to solve contradictions in the text and to smooth over contradictions in the text. And I guess a sort of an easier sort of dialectic, whereas Thomas's production exposed the contradictions in the text and actually sort of celebrated and sometimes even laughed at the contradictions in the text, which can feel quite exposing as a playwright. But then when I went home and thought about it, I thought, no, that's a very honest, intelligent production of my play. It's not a Regie Theater sort of, you know, show-off production.
Do you know that you gave an interview in New York after you've been to the premiere of Shopping and Fucking in Berlin? Do you remember this?
Yes.
Because you gave me a beautiful review in this interview. I think it was some kind of Time Out. Does Time Out exist in New York?
I think it was Village Voice, maybe, or something like
that.
Oh,
Village Voice. That was it. Village Voice. And you said, it was so nice, because I think you wanted to give a little critique here, but you said, I just came from this opening in Berlin, and they gave it to a young director, and was really strange, because it felt like as if you gave my play Shopping and Fucking to the Worcester group.
Yeah.
And that was for me, of course, a big honor to be compared to the
Yes,
Worcester.
that's big currency in New York. If you're compared to the Worcester group, they love that.
In
I
New York.
was trying to help you out, Thomas.
I'm not sure if they love that in London.
Oh, they love the Worcester group.
Now, this debate that we were just, or interrogation maybe of playwrights' work, the debate with the plays that characterized especially the first, let's say, decade at the Schaubühne after you moved there from the Baracke in 2000, and also extending it to other contemporary playwrights. I think Jon Fosse played an important role there in your work, Thomas, then extending it also to classical plays. You mentioned Ibsen and that production, which made you then also famous again in New York with another infamous review when you first came to New York with Hedda Gabler. But then in the second decade, I think the attention at the Schaubühne extended much more from playwrights, from authors to the director as an author. So if we look at the program we've seen over the past days, there was Katie Mitchell's work, there was Milo Rau's work. You also had people like Castellucci, Ivo van Hove, Simon McBurney, but also some of the German directors who are very distinct in their approaches. Michael Thalheimer, Herbert Fritsch, directing with your ensemble. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about how your interest somehow evolved from that playwrights theater from the early days and years to that much more comprehensive, exploration of regie, of directing that the Schaubühne is doing now?
I wouldn't describe it the way you're describing it, because I'm still doing every year a new text. This is kind of a rule which I gave myself. Sometimes it's not a play, but it's a contemporary text. Last season we premiered Maya Zades play Abgrund. Marius von Meilenburg premiered another play by her. We have regularly the plays by Marius von Meilenburg and Falk Richter, who I already mentioned, and some of the more relevant works of mine, which I recently did, are Returning to Reims and L'Histoire de la Violence, History of Violence by Edouard Louis, even though it's a prose text. Writing and contemporary texts, in my perception, even became more important in the last years of the Schaubühne again, maybe even linked to the political evolution of times. And also what you've been mentioning, that maybe directors became more important. I mean, when I was asked in 99, or was it even already in 98? I don't remember. When I was asked to take for me, at the time, late in Berlin, I brought somebody who it's beautiful choreographed regie theater or directors theater, and of course, the work in the 6 years was very, very important at the show, and then we've been working.
Hi, Thomas. I'm afraid we've just lost you for a moment there. I'll turn to Peter and try and restart your audio.
Okay, thanks, Alma, for trying to sort that out. So we'll just try and see. Well, come to one of the other questions I had to you, Mark. If we continue with that, what I found very interesting, discussing recently these early years with Jens Hilje also, was that he told me that some of the things he remembers, or one of the surprising things for him, was that in your early encounters, he found how both you and Sarah Kane were very much influenced by very different trajectories in German theatre, and that also Brecht played an important role in your work at the time and so on. Can you talk a little bit about what German theatre had meant to you in your formation as a writer?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, yes, the initial interest in my plays outside of the UK and initial productions were predominantly in Germany, and that sort of made sense to me. You know, it's that strange thing where I think probably the German theatre found them different and maybe very British, but maybe one of the reasons why the German theatre responded to them was that my love of German theatre and German playwriting was quite long-standing. So I remember at university, when I was looking for plays, maybe to directing exercises or just to write about, I was always returning to German plays, to Buchner and to Wedekind and to Brecht. And there was something about those texts. There was a sort of sardonic, ironic, poetic, muscular. They had a quality which managed to be very very poetic, and yet at the very same time very material and very concrete, and a sort of wit, and that was very different from a boulevard wit. It was a sort of irony that I really responded to. So yeah, that was really my main source of sort of playwrights that I felt most attuned to, was that line through from Buchner to Wedekind to Brecht. So when I started to write, and Shopping and Fucking was my first play, I mean, I think I was also influenced by American sort of novel writing of the time, people like Bret Easton Ellis and Douglas Coupland and American Psycho and Generation X and all of that. So in some ways it was sort of elements of that, but also elements of the sort of Buchner, Wedekind, Brecht tradition sort of informed that sort of writing. So when German theatre started responding, I did think, oh yeah, there's always been a little bit of a fascination with German drama, German plays in my writing. So maybe that's one of the reasons, even though they probably think they're very, very different, there's enough of that in there. I think it goes back a long, long time. My parents were very excited about joining the European Union in the early 70s. So it's almost impossible to imagine now, but lots of the country were absolutely delighted that we were going to join the European Union. And my dad's decision was to learn German. So he went to evening school and had books and tapes and stuff. So when I was about 3 or 4, I used to hear my dad learn, which he never really learned very much beyond basic tourist conversation. But growing up, I just sort of heard that sound of the German language, and I've always loved the sound of the language as well. And I'm now married to a German, so I'm very so there's a whole strand of fascination with Germany there.
Fantastic. And we've got Thomas back again, but we don't have a sound yet, Alma, I think. But anyway, I'll continue asking you another question, Mark. We mentioned earlier that you did this writers' workshop with German playwrights and with English playwrights recently. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with people who are nowadays in the position you were at the time you came first to the Schaubühne? What has changed maybe also in English playwriting in that young generation? What is influencing them? Is it perhaps also seeing work such as the Schaubühne's presence in their awareness of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Schaubühne is yeah, it is the most influential non-English speaking theatre in England and a lot of the world. So yes, young playwrights will have seen often Schaubühne productions, either visiting here or people take their weekend trip to Berlin and see as much as they can. So I think the Schaubühne and the aesthetic and the work has very much, sometimes it's the only influence outside of UK theatre that young British theatre makers have experienced, which is quite interesting because they then think that the Schaubühne is the representative of the German theatre, and that all German theatre is the same as Schaubühne theatre. And in fact, the Schaubühne is very different from the mainstream of German theatre in many ways. So it's sometimes quite funny when they talk as though they now understand German theatre because they've seen four Schaubühne productions, but they often haven't seen anything else. So yeah, I think it is very influential on young theatre makers, directors and designers and writers.
And that's maybe a beautiful link back to where we lost you, Thomas, talking about what directors do. So could you maybe then also bring that into this question that Mark has just raised? What makes your theatre also different from the other German theatres?
Can you hear me now again?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think what is different is something why I am disliked by most of the German critics, and why most of the international audiences do appreciate Schaubühne theater. I mean, we're still into storytelling. I think this is the big difference to a lot of theater which is going on in the rest of Germany and in the rest of Berlin. This is the main difference. You know, we have plot-driven performances. We have characters who change while in the run of the story. We have characters who undergo certain situations linked to the story which we are telling. Of course, I'm also developing the way I'm telling a story, and I do believe that probably the most significant show for this is History of Violence, where the way how you tell a story is really broken up, and it's a kind of mosaic of different non-chronological situations of the story. So here we are, or I as a director, I'm taking one step further, maybe, or also productions like The Marriage of Maria Braun, which people could have seen 2 days ago, or was it yesterday? I don't even remember. No, it was 2 days ago. Anyway, so what Mark just mentioned about the influence of the Schaubühne to English directors or British directors, it's quite interesting, because I'd say that my way of making theater was also very much influenced by watching British theater, because when I started at the Baracke, or even before, I went, for example, I went to Edinburgh International Festival and saw Ender Walsh's Disco Pigs in his own direction, and other plays by David Harrow, for example. And the most striking difference for me at the time, and that influenced a lot my work, is how English theater makers do treat dialogue. You know, German theater at the time was, to say it simple, very slow. You know, they took a long time to pronounce one single sentence, and then there was a long pause before the other character answered. Something which is still the case in some parts of the world and in some parts of Germany when you look at German theater. And my first experiences as a spectator watching this, especially Ender Walsh's Disco Pigs, was okay, so the rhythm and the speed of the music I like to listen, and I still do like to listen to, which is punk and American hardcore music, which is very fast music. This is what excites me, and I found this rhythm in these shows. So I understood that you can have the same drive on a theater stage, and that's what I'm working on a lot. So I'm in Germany probably one of the few directors who work with the actors on the dialogue, who work with them on how the dialogue should be pronounced. And for some years now, I'm working with the Sanford-Meisner technique of repetition exercise, which provides you with a beautiful exercise and a beautiful training to be able to work in this plot-driven, dialogue-based English or English-speaking tradition of plot-driven theater. And so this influenced me, and this is part of my success also when I do Ibsen performances, and also when I do Shakespeare, because always when I do Shakespeare, I ask a writer to do a new translation. And in the case of the German Shakespeares, which I did, it was always Marius von Meinburg. And I asked him not to respect the verse, because if we respect the verse in the German language, we have much more syllables in the German language. We lose content if we respect the blank verse. That's why when you listen to Shakespeare in an old translation in a German theater, you don't understand a word. You don't understand what are they talking about, because we need much more syllables to express an idea. And if you reduce it to the blank verse, you reduce the content, and you don't know anymore what they are talking about. So content and text as an act of action. Difficult to translate. Sprechakt, how would you translate Sprechakt?
No, we say speech act.
Speech act.
Yeah, it's an academic, slightly academic term, but yeah, speech act.
That the text is a speech act is something which in German theater is not very widespread in the director's minds and in the actors' minds. They don't pay, for some years now, or even decades, they don't pay attention to texts. There's a big mistrust in working on a text, working on what it means, working on the rhythm, on the pronunciation, on the speed. strange situation in Germany. But because I have these influences as a spectator of British drama, I brought these impressions to my own theater making, and that's why I do believe that international audiences appreciate my work more than the work of most other German directors.
And then it seems it's also the case because text for you doesn't only mean speech or word, but as you just said, it's something embodied, it's characterized by rhythm, so by a whole layer of things that go on when you have a dialogue, when you have an exchange.
Well, yeah, there's so many levels to this question, you know. It's also you can just simply say most of the time when I go to theater, the tempo of the theater show is more slowly than in real life, and that drives me crazy. They take so much time to pronounce a simple sentence, to pronounce a simple idea. You know, they make so much colors and I use the word arabesque, ornament to say a simple sentence. And why this is because of training at the theater schools is very poor. It's all about how do I get the right emotion. So they're constantly looking for emotion, but they don't look for brain, you know. They don't talk about what does the character want, and because the character wants this, they take the speech act as a tool. You know, it's not in real life. I don't think about what kind of emotion do I have when I try to achieve something. But actors in German theater most of the time think about, oh, do I have the right state of emotion to pronounce my sentence? And that makes this theater so miserable and so depressing. And this is one level to this issue and to this problem. But it's also, let's be honest, I think it's also linked to the fact that we have permanent ensembles. Permanent ensembles provide some of the actors with a situation where they don't have to worry so much about the future. So they become lazy, honestly. You know, they become lazy in how do I work my text? Do I understand what I'm talking about? How do I improve my skills? Everywhere I go in the world, actors do take workshops, do continue training, do improve their skills. Not so in Germany most of the time. No? They're not, as soon as they entered theater school, they do believe they made it. Even worse when they enter a famous theater school, that's even worse because they think, oh, I'm now at the theater school where Lars Eidinger was, and I will be the next generation Lars Eidinger. That's another reason for why this this idea of rhythm and to embody language is so poorly developed. But this is also something because you cannot work on this if you don't have a director who wants to work on this, and if you don't have a director who is passionate about these questions, and if you don't have a director who wants to go into communication about this. Most of German directors, they don't want to go there. They want to talk about set design. They want to talk about video. They want to talk about aesthetics and installation and projection. And they talk about Bildertheater, which would be literally translated theater of images. This is the very strong branch of German theater at the moment. It's not a branch which involves the art of an actor. And I'm always wondering why there isn't any revolution in the German theater landscape of actors. Why the actors are not on the barricades and say, hey, guys, don't forget, in the end, it's us in front of the audience and not you, the director, and not you, the set designer, and not you, the video artist. You know, it's us, and we are the allies of the writers.
Mark, would you subscribe to the critique of German theater, or what were the experiences you have made having seen your work staged at the Schaubühne, but of course also at many, many other theaters across Germany?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been one of the really great things about being a playwright, and particularly the early work being produced in German theaters was that I got to see a lot of work in German theaters, and a lot of it of an incredibly high standard. I mean, I think the discipline of the training and the rigor of the work is quite astonishing. And then obviously, yeah, as you travel far and wide, you realize that it's not all so great. And there's some pretty awful work in some Stadttheaters. There's work that's actually poorer than you would find in any English theatre. Some of the work in smaller Stadttheaters can be really shockingly, really bad. But I think, I think probably what's really dominated, maybe a little less dominant now, but was sort of on the rise and then became a thing, was the fixation on the post-dramatic theatre. Sort of pushed me away from, not so much from the actual productions, but actually dialogue with German theatre makers is as the book, the post-dramatic theatre, the Hans Thies Lehmann book, became more and more like Chairman Mao's Little Red Book, and people would wave it at you and say, but this is not in post-dramatic theatre, you can't do that, it's not in the book by Hans Thies Lehmann, it's not possible. You say, well, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to do everything that it says. It's okay sometimes to disagree with Hans Thies Lehmann or do something that's... And then when I meet Hans Thies Lehmann himself, he's the sweetest man in the whole world. He said it was just some observations that I made about theatre that was people were making, but I was observing it about things that were already made. It's not me saying how theatre of the future should be made. He was the humblest, sweetest man. But the followers of Hans Thies Lehmann became so dominant that I quite often had to walk away from conversations. This is about 10 years into my relationship with German theatre, because there was such a fanaticism about it that it was like talking to a Trump supporter or something. There was no logical questioning to be had anymore. And I think that's starting to ease off a little bit now. And I think hopefully
and Hans Thies Lehmann regrets all this, as you know.
Yeah.
He just published a book which is called Dramatic Theatre.
Yes, and I've read whatever I can in translation. Yeah, he's read the dramatic and the post-dramatic tragedy, which is an amazing, intelligent book. No, he's great. I imagined him to be like Stalin because of his followers, but actually he couldn't have been anything less like Stalin.
Speaking of Stalin, we could move to one, I think, topic or one concern with theatre that I think also connects both of you from the start, and that's the engagement with politics, with the reality out there, with perhaps also the attempt to use theatre as a medium to engage with reality, to reflect on reality, to point towards problems of our times and articulate them on stage. How has that engagement, that political impetus changed and developed over the past 20, 25 years? Are we again in a political moment as we were in the late 90s, in that post-Thatcher area of depression that had this certain political critique out of which the In Your Face work came as a reaction? Where are we there today?
Do you want to go, Mark?
That's a big question. I mean, I would say the initial impetus of my first plays was really a critique of the whole sort of postmodern mindset. So that includes. So it's not really a question of left or right, because both left and right in some ways had embraced that and were playing for that. It was that sort of neoliberal, but also postmodern sort of outlook that everything, the sort of history had ended, and that the major problems of the world have been solved, and we just had to sit back, and this was the best possible world that we could reach, was this neoliberal, globalized moment. So I think my initial impulse to start writing, really, when I started writing, was to kick against that and to question that, and to find out, you know, the conflicts that were clearly still there, and the things that couldn't be solved by being cool or ironic or global. And I was writing about that world, but sort of kicking against it. And we're now in, you know, in such a different, that was over 20 years ago. And we're now in such a different moment with this very nationalistic and xenophobic and this push back from, you know, in many places, the far right, that's a very different thing for a playwright to be in the middle of. It's almost the complete opposite of that sort of neoliberal postmodern moment. So I think I'm still finding my way, really, as to how you respond to that as a playwright. But I've got a feeling that coolness and irony and nothing was ever solved really by coolness and irony, but they were part of a sort of part of a mindset of a generation that I was sort of a part of. But I certainly feel saying goodbye to coolness and irony is an essential part of that. Actually, sort of emotionally, intellectually, physically committing in the play, and not committing to an ideology, but just dispensing with irony and coolness, and sort of, yeah, a totally post-ironic experience is something of what I think I'm trying to do that's different from where I would have been 20 years ago.
And in your work, Thomas, you mentioned earlier the pieces by Eribon and the history of violence as well. There was maybe this analysis, the attempt to understand, to find reasons, to point out reasons.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, theory became more and more important, and is actually one of the most important things now, I'd say. You know, the moment we are undergoing under this pandemic is a perfect moment to study theory, to study political concepts, to study the tradition of different political concepts, to read all these important works, all the French philosophers, but maybe also some of the Germans of the 19th century, to study again. Because what we are facing is a lot of movements, is a lot of a lot of people not being satisfied with the situation in the world, a lot of people not wanting to continue the way the world is going, but there's a lot of failure in political movements and a lot of frustration and depression, only to mention the Arab Spring, Occupy, Indignados in Spain, Syntagma Square in Athens. These are in the last 5 years, a lot of movements which did not succeed completely in what they were aiming for. So I do believe theory to change the world, and there's a lot of people who had ideas about it and were thinking about this, is crucial in order to change the world. What is important for me at the moment, that for some years I've been making a very crucial distinction between the theater maker and the political activist, let's say. So I think what I'm doing in theater is trying to ask the questions which are worrying me, but I'm not romantic or naive in the sense of that I do believe that this will change the world. So when I'm doing theater, it's more about myself, my own contradictions I'm living in, my own lies, my own hypocrisy, my own ways of betraying myself. This is an interest. These are interesting topics for the stage. It's not interesting for the stage to know what is right or what is wrong, and to tell the people in the audience what is right and what is wrong. But in politics, this is important. In politics, it's very important to tell the people what is right and what is wrong, and to tell them to stop fake news, and to tell them to stop to listen to stupid people. But to change this and to change the world, we have to be in the street. We don't have to, but there's no need to be on a stage. And so every time when there's a new social movement coming, I try to be with the people. I try to be with every important anti-racist manifestation, demonstration in Berlin. I try to be try to speak up in public about these issues. But I don't believe that theater will bring the change. What happened with returning to Reims for me was that all of a sudden I met a text and the life of an author which was so similar to my own past, where I came from, where I'm coming from. And all of a sudden, this guy is talking about social shame, and it's talking about how is it to be coming from a poorer background and to find yourself in the established art world of a big city in Europe, and being part of a complete different class. And it's about social shame. It's about how you're always afraid of being discovered, of being somebody who should not be there because you're not of this class. So this was for me in the theory of describing social realities, mind-blowing. It was really something which I wasn't aware of. So when I stopped the book, I told myself, finally, I'm not alone. I found out that I'm not alone, and never thought about putting this book on stage. It was only because Nina Hoss, the actress at the time, was shooting Homeland in New York, and that was the time when Trump was elected. So we were all the two of us in a big depression, and she asked me, what can we do? What kind of show are we going to do next? And then I told her about the book, and I sent her the book and said, well, what do you think? And she was also amazed about the book, and said, and then I had this idea of the documentary movie, and I met Didier, and I did something completely different to what I've done before for the Manchester International Festival with this book. And it can be considered as a kind of turning point in my work, because it was again a work where I didn't care about the success or the outcome. It was a very personal point of I want to tell this story, and I want to meet this guy, and I want to meet his thoughts, and I want to know more about him. And surprisingly, it met the interest of a big audience. You know? So I did a French version, an Italian version. I'm going to do a Swedish version. We've been performing it in English first, and then in Berlin, but also in New York. So this is strange that this book and this writing became so relevant to me. And also, I'm a tiny little playwright here, because the dialogues in between the documentary movie we developed and wrote down during the process of rehearsals with the aid of Maya Zade, where we didn't know at that time that she was a playwright. She only revealed herself later. Yeah, but this can be considered a turning point in two aspects. One, I'm much more open to develop my aesthetical language and to not care so much about, oh, we need another Ibsen success. And secondly, because I'm so close now with these three guys, Didier Ribon, Geoffroy de la Gannerie, and Edouard Louis, I have a constant exchange with these three about political situation, and I have a lot of impact from them, and they are very radical in their view of the world, and this pushes me, and of course this also brought me clearly to the point of, I mean, I was aware of this always, but now it's an important statement to say, go out, go in the street, change the world, get rid of the nationalists which are running most of our countries, and try to bring change. It's so important, and we are in a desperate situation.
And looking at the time, I see that we should probably have done enough of our boy group conversation here, and should turn to bringing in a few at least of the voices that received or arrived here in writing, and put some of the questions that we got to you, Thomas and Mark. And I think one question here, or one topic, Mark, that came up in several questions was inevitably Brexit, and what will be, do you think, is a question here, the cultural and artistic consequences when the UK leaves, and why or why not is this an interesting or relevant question at all, is added here.
Yes, I mean, when just the word Brexit just makes you feel very depressed, doesn't it? I think the only good thing that's come out of it is that maybe it's pushed people in theatre into realizing that maybe we've taken our relationship with other European theatres and other European countries a little bit for granted. So obviously, the vast majority of people working in the theatre wanted to remain in the European Union. You know, I would guess 99% of anybody working in the theatre wants to remain in the European Union. So I think if some good's come out of it, it's made people working in theatre in the UK more determined to maintain and grow their links with theatres across Europe as a way of maintaining some sort of dialogue with the rest of the Europe as it falls away in other parts of national life because of Brexit. I think theatre people are very determined. So if anything, hopefully it will lead to more conversation and more collaboration with European theatres than it did before, as a sort of corrective, a small corrective to the bigger move towards the Brexit.
Thomas, the next question is for you. Beautiful autograph photo we have here. Thomas, here's a question about the future of the Schaubühne, how in the situation with the drink. Cancellations, annulations. Is there a way you prepare for the future when the theatre will reopen? And do you think that there may be changes in the way in the future how we come together in the theater, how audiences congregate, and also maybe even for the aesthetics of your theater work through this situation?
Oh, this is a big question. Well, first of all, I don't know at all. Like all of us, we don't know how long this is going to last, and how long we cannot meet and gather, especially in a theater auditorium. There are some scenarios where people ask theater people or me as a director of the Schaubühne to perform under certain conditions, which means a physical distance of one audience member to the other, only every second row audience, and then 2 seats free, and then the next audience member. This would mean, and that's the first thing, economically for us a disaster, because we would then have to face 10% of box office, what we usually get, or 20%. But we are very much dependent of box office as Schaubühne, as we are a private theater. Okay, we are subsidized by the city, but we earn approximately 35% of our budget we earn ourselves with box office and touring. So at the moment we are under Kurzarbeit. I don't know the expression in English. Peter, what is it?
Just, there isn't really an English expression. It just means short working. We used to have in the 70s the 3-day week and stuff like that. It's sort of short working, short work.
Yeah, it means that the state provides for, I think it's 60 or 80% now of the salary, but people will stay employed.
The state provides 60% of the salary of our permanent employees, which are 230 people, and we add another 30%. That means at the moment we can handle the situation. We can deal with the crisis and the catastrophe. But if people are asking us to go back on stage and reopen, we won't get any Kurzarbeit money anymore, which means we have to earn our money again ourselves. And to do this, we need a full auditorium, because we've been running the Schaubühne the last 3 months before the lockdown. We had every night sold out, every single night, 100% frequentation of the Schaubühne. And that is what we are used to, and that is how we make our budget. That is how we pay our artists, our employees. If we don't have this income, we have a big problem. The other thing is, of course, how do we approach the question of physical distancing among the actors? Do we do different mise en scène? Do we do new blocking? I can hardly imagine to perform a show like History of Violence with physical distance. It's a love story about 2 men who meet at night and go into the apartment and do have sex the whole night, and they're kissing, they're embracing. How do you want to portray this with physical distance? I don't know. And also imagine the situation: you're sitting in a theater with another 50 people, while usually you're sharing the auditorium with 500 people, and you look at a theater performance where the actors do have to pay respect to the physical distance. That is not a big advertisement for theater. I would be afraid that people after this experience would not come back, because it's so depressing, and it's nothing about normality. It's more about the crazy and terrible times we're living in. I could imagine it. If the politicians do tell us you have to open, I can't do anyway anything against it, which means I would follow. I would try to do theater performances with social distance, and we're lucky enough we have 35 plays in repertoire, amongst some monologues, some pretty successful monologues. It's possible, but it's not a very beautiful perspective. One and last thing I want to add, talking about if I do believe my aesthetics will change, or the aesthetics of theater. Honestly, I've been in rehearsal for Virginie Despentes, Bernard Subutex, when we had to stop rehearsals. And since I'm all the time thinking, oh, fuck, if 6 months later we're going to reopen Schaubühne with this show, is it the right show in the right moment? Because it's dealing with so many issues, critical issues of modern Paris, of xenophobia, of racism, of far right movement. But after a pandemic experience, wouldn't it be better to perform? I'm not going to say.
Batman in skirts. I want
Yes.
I want a comedy. I want a comedy.
Yes.
The first thing I want to see when I come out of isolation is a comedy.
I agree. I know, Mark.
I want a farce. Play a farce.
Yes, I know. And I have a great comedy written by Maya Zade. So probably I have to first put the Maya Zade comedy on stage, and then do Werner Subutex.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I think we should close with one short question to each of you. Thomas, you just mentioned there's 35 productions in your repertoire. Which would you consider, as a question here, the most emblematic of what you sought to achieve during your time as artistic director at the Schaubühne?
I think it would be a mixture between History of Violence, Returning to Reims, Richard III, Hamlet.
That's what you've got to put on. That's what you've got to put on. The greatest hits.
And Mark, there's one interesting question to you. As you know other theaters as well as the Schaubühne, if someone really likes Thomas's work at the Schaubühne, which is the other theater that person should look at? Is there any equivalent?
I don't know. I mean, it's not possible anymore, but I think one of the pleasurable things for me was watching the parallel lives of the Volksbühne and the Schaubühne, and how different they were, that in a 10-15 minute journey across Berlin, you could have two totally different aesthetics and two totally different. I don't think, although the British theatre is varied, I don't think you could travel 20 minutes and find two totally different embodiments of what theatre is, as the Volksbühne and the Schaubühne in the last sort of decade past. It's sort of finished now, that moment. But I grew to love and respect both those ways of making theatre, and I enjoyed the fact that on 2 evenings I could see such contrasting ways of working. So I'm recommending a time machine. Go back and see Volksbühne, Schaubühne when they were both playing at the same time.
I would recommend the same.
That's good. We end with agreement, and obviously we end
We always agree.
Big hope, in big hope as well, that the Schaubühne and all the other magnificent theaters we've seen during the online theater festival here will be able to open soon in the summer, and that will come out of this crisis with the theater intact and hopefully reinvigorated in a way. Thomas and Mark, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And again, thanks very much to all of you in the audience, spectators out there online in the net and the web. And thanks to Alma, Magda and Maria.
Thank you, Peter, for moderating this absolutely fascinating discussion. There was a moment, Thomas, when you spoke of this sensation when one goes to the theater of a bit of frustration when the speed of thought is not quite up to the speed of thought in life. And I think I can speak for everyone saying that this was certainly not the case today. In the past hour, I won't even attempt to mention all the different topics that the three of you discussed. So thank you very much. And yes, as Peter says, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.